Silent Hill Downpour. This game would unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, be the last mainline entry in the Silent Hill series. It retained the modern style and vibe that Homecoming went for, but under a new development studio. This wouldn't exactly be the end for Silent Hill overall, but it would be the end for an official title in the series. So, where did the series end? Did the last mainline game go out with a bang, or a whimper? We're going to find out today as I dive deep into Silent Hill Downpour. I'll be looking at story, mechanics, gameplay, and everything in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the Silent Hill games, it would make sense to go watch those now. If you like the video, give it a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you want to support me, you can do so over on Patreon, where I upload extended cuts of my full retrospectives with content that YouTube won't let me upload. Spoiler alert for Silent Hill Downpour. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Silent Hill Downpour. Silent Hill Downpour was developed by Vatra Games, a new studio to the Silent Hill series. Vatra was formed out of ex-2K Shek developers. They only made 2 games in their entire history: Rush and Attack Expatriate for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and the game that we're talking about today. The game was originally announced as Silent Hill 8, and in early stages of development had a discussed multiplayer component. The narrative was intended to be self-contained, following the vein of Silent Hill 2. The decision was made early on to make the main character a criminal. This choice was used to thwart the expectations that Silent Hill fans had about the series, putting the main character's wrongdoings out in front before the reveal, instead of that being the crux of the story. Members of Vatra opposed having a criminal as the protagonist, as they were uncomfortable with the audience playing a bad guy. Audience focus groups also had a problem with it, feeling uncomfortable, but the team still went forward with the idea. The team wanted to focus the other world on water this time around. They thought that rain was the scary manifestation of water because of the darkness that comes with a storm. The atmosphere of the game was inspired by Brno in the Czech Republic, the location of Vatra Studios. They used this place as inspiration because of the macabre history of the Czech Republic and the material reminders of the Soviet regime. Downpour was the first game to replace Akira Yamaoka as composer. Daniel Licht took up the new role and studied the music of the previous games, using those soundtracks as inspiration. Downpour's main theme was performed by Korn for some reason, a choice made by Konami. The game was originally set to release in October 2011, but the release date was pushed back to March 2012. The game was officially released on March 13th, 2012 for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. I'm here to quickly give my obligatory notes. The first is that Silent Hill's story is hidden underneath the surface, as we know. Most of the games in the series don't put their story out in the open, and it requires research, a close eye, and time to figure out what really happened. Because of that, I'll be giving a surface-level explanation of the story throughout my review, one that would mirror a first-time playthrough. At the end, I'll go over what really happened in Silent Hill Downpour. Also, I played Silent Hill Downpour on the Xbox 360. I originally planned to use the backwards compatibility function of the Xbox Series S, but Downpour was removed from the Microsoft Store at some point, so that was not available to me. Downpour's difficulty is finally a return to form, allowing us to choose between general difficulty and riddle difficulty. The game starts with our main character in a prison. Murphy Pendleton is following a guard down a hallway to the showers. The guard seems to have set something up for Murphy, and inside, he advises him to turn on the showers so the steam will cover the cameras. We get a few weapons and someone comes in, someone that Murphy wants to hurt.
Jesus, you scared the hell out of me. What the hell's going on? Where's Sewell? There's been a mistake. I'm a sequestered prisoner. You're not supposed to be here.
And that's exactly what we do. We have to kill this man, and as Murphy finishes the job, he wakes up. This is an interesting play on every game, starting with a nightmare sequence. Murphy's nightmare is actually a dream. Murphy is actually being escorted out of the prison because he's being transported to a maximum security facility. The officer in charge oversees Murphy's transfer and doesn't seem to like him. On the bus ride, Murphy has some flashbacks to life before, and one of the inmates is curious about his crimes. The bus crashes while en route, and Murphy escapes the wreckage. We pick up a flashlight and a walkie-talkie. The walkie-talkie in this game will function as our radio. We'll start to get more chatter as we approach enemies or as they approach us. Murphy makes his way through the forest and has to balance on a downed tree. I just really want to use this spot to complain about balancing mechanics in video games. I don't ever really understand why these sequences are included. They don't really do anything except eat up time, and they have a built-in disadvantage. They can't be challenging at all, because if they're challenging, then they're annoying. No one wants to actually have to try to balance on a tree stump, but if they aren't challenging, then they're pointless and boring. It's always just seemed like filler to me, and they could be removed and I wouldn't think of the game any differently. When Murphy gets to the other side of the cavern, Agent Cunningham is across a small outcropping, gun ready.
Hands where I can see him. Do it.
Take it easy. I'm not going anywhere.
I said, on the ground, now.
She thinks Murphy is trying to escape and wants him to stay where he is. Before she can get to the other side, she falls off the edge, and we have a choice to make. Silent Hill Downpour has a choice system implemented at certain points throughout the game. These will obviously affect which ending we receive, but most of the choices don't really affect what happens at that point in the story. Either choice here will see Agent Cunningham falling down the cavern regardless. Outside, we're thrust into the streets for the first time and given total control. Silent Hill Downpour's control scheme is pretty similar to Homecoming in just about everything but combat. It has that over-the-shoulder camera, and it stays like that for most of the game. Here we can collect our first mystery of the game. These are basically memos, and they're collected in Murphy's journal. We can pull them up when we want and inspect them further. I like making the memos easier to interface with and making them an in-world object, letting me actually see the notes rather than just text on screen with a background. The only issue I have with the journal is that you can only scroll across the face of the notes in 3 chunks. This would result in me sometimes having some of the note cut off by the button maps at the bottom of the screen and having to flip back and forth to read the text. Murphy's journal also has tips on how to play the game, current objectives, and maps of the area. Murphy finds a gas station and makes his way around it. Our overall goal is to find a new set of clothes because the prisoner attire isn't exactly the most inconspicuous. A lot of the main quests in the game have us following some form of drag marks or footprints on the ground. I wasn't really the biggest fan of this because it was a little too obvious. It was basically a waypoint marker, just in a roundabout way. And looking down at the ground is less time that I'm looking at the surroundings and being interested in the world. Murphy finds an old truck and a mailman interrupts him. Howard introduces himself, but Murphy is pretty standoffish.
The wicked old beast. Me, I'm partial to something with a little less rust. But to each his own.
Look, I don't want any trouble. Just point the way out of town, and I'll keep right on going.
Now who said anything about trouble? Just trying to be helpful, son.
He doesn't want to get turned in so soon. Murphy sees someone in the window of the nearby building, but Howard isn't sure what he's talking about. Murphy heads into the diner nearby and finds a flyer about the town's nearby attraction, Devil's Pit. In the kitchen, Murphy accidentally starts a fire and sets off the fire alarm. The room begins to flood and changes into the other world, but Murphy stops the flood before it kills him. An exit shows itself, and we make our way through this strange place. The other world in this game has a very odd feeling. It's definitely not as scary or atmospheric as Team Silent's renditions, but it is interesting. It's kind of a half-transitioned world. Still normal objects abound, and it's almost like a surreal place that's in flux. It's not really scary overall, though, and gives me more of a Scarecrow sequence from Arkham Asylum vibe than anything. I do commend its use of infinite hallways and winding corridors, though. During our short exploration of the otherworld, the Void appears, a constant in Downpour's otherworld sequences. It chases us through the hallways, and we can't get caught in it for too long, or Murphy will be obliterated. We can knock over obstacles to slow it down, reminiscent of Shattered Memories' otherworld sequences, but done a little better. Eventually, we escape the Void and have to interact with some paintings and valves to flip rooms around and make our way out of the otherworld. One thing I am impressed with in Downpour is the environments. Everything is so large and detailed. I don't love the overall aesthetic, but every area is so interesting and just feels massive. It also feels like there's no shortage of these areas. They just come one after another, and it's fantastic. The Void returns again, and we have to make our way out of its jaw, or rather, hole. Murphy arrives back in the diner's kitchen, and we can travel to the motel beside it. We find a power cord which we can use on a kettle that will steam the window beside it, revealing a code to a safe nearby. The safe doesn't work normally, though, with some of the knobs changing other inputs on the safe. Inside, we find our first gun of the game, a Colt pistol. Downstairs in the basement, we also find notes of a voyeur that was spying on people in the rooms throughout the motel. In the other room, one of the prisoners that was on the bus with us seems to be beating a woman in the corner, and Murphy stops him. It turns out that this wasn't a normal woman, though, but our first enemy of the game, the Screamer. My two biggest complaints of the game come in full force here. First are the enemy designs. Downpour's enemies are particularly uninspired, and there aren't many varieties of them. They're all humanoid, and they just look like spooky B-movie characters rather than monsters manifested from someone's subconscious. Second is the combat. I feel about the combat in this game how I felt about combat in Homecoming. It's more frustrating than it is tight and responsive. Most of our combat consists of attacking and blocking. We can attack until our opponent doesn't feel it anymore, and then we block until the enemy stops, and repeat. The only problem with this is that it just doesn't feel good, and timing blocks has to be precise. If it's not, we eat damage and end up using all of our health packs. It's pretty easy to get caught in a flurry of annoying attacks as well. The worst part about combat, though, is just how long it takes. Every encounter is the same as the last, and if you're going to make your game's combat encounters repetitive, at least make them short. Weapons are also a throwback to Origins, with the breakable objects coming into play. This time around, we can only hold one weapon at a time, though, so we have to constantly be on the lookout for other weapons available around the area that we're in. Weapons range from things like frying pans and knives to chairs and pipes. We also get ranged weapons. We can hold one of these and one melee weapon at a time, but when we go to use the ranged weapon, we drop the melee one. It's kind of an odd system and is a little awkward to manage overall. Murphy finds a lift in the basement, and it takes him to a set of cabins. Inside one of them, he finds a new set of clothes that has a police badge inside. Murphy also finds some game tokens and uses them to play a game called Jailbreak. Completing it gives us a ticket to ride the Devil's Pit tram. We arrive at the Devil's Pit, and inside one of the workshops we find a lighter, which will be used for lighting many different things throughout our playthrough, but also can be used as a source of light when we lose our flashlight. Murphy also hears a radio station playing a song request that was dedicated to him. We can chop down boards on doors as long as we have some type of axe or bladed weapon, and Murphy does this to move on. On the observation deck, we can see down into the Devil's Pit itself, and Murphy meets someone new.
Guess by looking at it, but this place used to be filled with all kinds of visitors. Moms and dads and little kids and... Yeah, it was a really nice place.
I'm sorry. You are?
Name's JP, and that, sir, is the Devil's Pit.
JP tells us which way to head and says he can't show us because there's some place he has to be. Murphy heads down the lift and defeats some screamers. Another annoying thing about combat in Downpour is the way killing enemies works. Sometimes enemies die during fighting on feet, but sometimes they'll survive after they're downed. In this case, you have to finish them off, but how many hits this takes is left up to the game's discretion. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5. It's just random, and if you don't finish them off, then they'll come after you later, and it's incredibly annoying. There's another reason for this, which I'll talk about later as well. Murphy almost falls down into the pit when a bridge breaks, and we have to pull ourselves up. We lose all of our weapons here, though, which is not very cool at all, Dad. We find some water-powered machines in the next room and have to divert the water in a certain direction to get the power flowing. The lift takes Murphy down into the mines. We find a newspaper article about a train accident at the Devil's Pit, causing the death of 8 children. It seems that JP caused the accident because he had been drinking on the job. In the next room, we fight a new enemy, the Weeping Bat, a long, gangly creature that takes an annoying amount of time to kill and knocks us down far too often. Heading through the mines, we find JP standing on the edge of an overlook.
Later! Oh, it's just you.
What are you doing, JP?
You know, enjoying the view.
He's about to jump, racked with guilt about the deaths of those children. We can choose here to either taunt him or console him, and consoling apparently sounds like this.
Wait. What do you mean? Just wait a second.
Back in the mines, we find a detonator that we can use to clear a path further in. Murphy takes a lift even further down, leagues under the ground at this point, and finds a man electrocuted. A riddle on his body will guide us in the next puzzle. Pressing these buttons in the right order will return the power to the train, allowing us to ride it. Riding the train, Murphy will begin to see possessed miners rushing at the cart and weeping bats crawling along the ceiling, while his ride is narrated by a woman giving a history of the pit. A weeping bat eventually attacks us, and we have to complete a QTE to shake it off. It took me way too many tries to realize that you can't shake the weeping bats off too fast, because when you're trying to break free from something that's trying to kill you, you have to be gentle. Duh. You also can't skip the previous parts of the ride, you just have to sit through it on each try. At the end of Murphy's ride, Agent Cunningham is there to greet him, apparently surviving her fall from earlier.
Against the wall. I said, up against the wall!
You don't have to do this. We should help each other. This place, I don't know what it is or how we got here. But one thing
Just shut up!
She finds the badge in Murphy's pocket, and it seems to strike a chord with her. She tries to kill Murphy, but she can't, and decides to let him go. On the other side of the Devil's Pit, our new objective is to escape Silent Hill. We're officially in the town proper. In the streets of Silent Hill, we achieve our first side quest. One of Downpour's biggest strengths is its side quests. These are generally interesting and require exploration of the world and the objectives that we have to complete. I loved this addition and made the game feel not only less linear, but a lot larger and more filled out. I'll go over all of the side quests in depth towards the end because most of them are pretty interesting, but for now, we'll just talk about this one. Some police cars are patrolling around the city, and when we approach them, monsters appear. If we head into the police station, we can recall the cars by inputting their car numbers into the receiver and pressing the recall button. Inside the police station, we can find some documents detailing the crime in town and a detailed police chase encounter. We find some crime photos and a missing child poster for a boy named Charlie with the same last name as Murphy. Inside the basement of a dimly lit house, we can get some extra equipment, but turning the TV on knocks the lights out and a terrifying voice chases us out of the house. We can use a hook to pull down one of the fire escape ladders and traverse the balconies to get to an open window. Inside, Murphy finds another radio dedicating songs to him. Upstairs, we find a person hanged in their living room and a note about the resident stealing stuff from other tenants. We find a box of these belongings and we have to return them to their rightful apartments. Each room will have sound cues hinting to which item belongs there. War sounds for a war medal or a ticking clock for a watch. When we return all the items, we can head back to the apartment and find the man's body gone and his clothes remaining, which Murphy can wear to get mega dripped out. As Murphy heads outside, he sees a collection of mail at the door. Howard is outside and Murphy is trying to find the radio station because of the dedications being made to him.
And the question, this is a busy town. Do you think these letters deliver themselves?
Whatever. Can you at least tell me where the radio station is? Someone's been calling in, making these dedications to me.
Oh, sure. That'd be the tall building in the center of town. Big old monster of a clock at the top.
He says he ran into Agent Cunningham, but Murphy says he doesn't know why she hates him. Murphy makes his way to the radio station, and on the way, we can find an apartment that looks very familiar. It's an exact recreation of room 302 from Silent Hill 4, or it actually is room 302. Murphy can find an article about a riot at the Ryall State Prison that resulted in 4 fatalities. Murphy makes his way through the park and eventually arrives at the Centennial Building. He finds his parole papers posted on the door and has a flashback to when he was in prison. Murphy is talking to the guard Sewell, and Officer Coleridge is trying to convince him to not get involved with Sewell.
Hey Murphy, remember, this is a limited time offer, my friend.
I'll let you know. What's up, Officer Coleridge?
What was that about?
Nothing.
Hey, don't bullshit a bullshitter. Sewell's bad news, Murph. He doesn't do anyone favors.
Murphy says he has unfinished business before getting out on parole. Coleridge says that he isn't like the other guys. We learn that Murphy led the cops on a 10-hour police chase, which is why he's in prison. Inside the garage, we find a memo stating that Coleridge had put a testimony in against Sewell's alleged violations. We get a UV light attachment for our flashlight that will let us see things hidden. We can track the marks into the security office and use the panels to open the door. We have to drain the water downstairs using the fire truck hose and get the security card from the dead officer on the ground. This takes us inside of a library where we can use our UV light to see which books have been taken out. Some of these books have some interesting history about the natives of Silent Hill. We find a document talking about the murder of a prisoner named Napier, assumingly the man that Murphy was seen killing at the beginning of the game. Murphy gains access to the second floor, and we encounter a new type of enemy, the dolls. These enemies use shadows to attack us that can only be seen using the UV light. Attacking the shadows won't do much though, so we have to attack the dolls themselves to take them out. This was probably my favorite enemy in the game, as they seem to be the most inventive. Upstairs, we have to get the code for a door keypad by arranging envelopes on the desk so they line up. On the third floor, we find a psychological evaluation of a prisoner who is 43 years old and was serving a sentence for third-degree murder and a certain type of assault of a child. Assumingly, this is also Napier. Murphy finds a film reel in the library, and we can put it in the projector to see flashes of different clocks. We can use these times to input them into a safe and gain access to its contents. Inside, we find an ID card and get a flashback of Murphy talking to Sewell. He is propositioning Murphy to kill Napier and tells him that in exchange he owes Sewell a favor. There's another document here that details suspicions around Sewell's behavior. The ID card allows us to travel up to the 18th floor and gain access to the radio station.
Was another rock and roll classic coming to you courtesy of DJ Ricks on this fine afternoon. Weatherman says there's a storm coming our way to spoil the fun. So batten down the hatches and snuggle up under the blanket with the one you love, because it's going to be a rough ride. And speaking of rough rides, we got another dedication going out to my man with the plan, Murphy Pendleton. Somebody out there has got an eye on you, MP, so watch your back and keep it on track.
DJ Ricks is inside delivering another dedication to Murphy when Murphy himself walks in. He says he doesn't know what the dedications are about. Ricks says he's been hoping someone shows up, but he doesn't have time to explain, and they have to get out. He says he has a boat, but someone took the keys. If they get them, they can get out.
You know what I mean? Bobby Ricks? Uh-huh. Yeah, sure. Who's it going out to? But that's nice of you to think of me. Yeah, real nice. Thank you. They're coming.
Cunningham shows up again. Screamers burst in and take Ricks and seemingly Cunningham because they're gone when the lights come back. Murphy finds some lighter fluid and ignites a pile of trash, causing the world to transform once more. We have to avoid the void again, this time dodging falling cars and cages. Eventually, we come to an upside-down room. I want to give Downpour credit for bringing back the interesting camera angles that we were used to with Silent Hill. It doesn't always use them perfectly, but it's at least a bit of a return to form. We dodge some cages and some bodies spitting blood, eventually stopping some clock hands and balancing on them. Murphy ends up falling from a clock tower and arriving back in the streets of Silent Hill.
You know, you could get your death out here if you're not careful. Got something for you.
Howard delivers him a letter from St. Maria's orphanage, but Murphy rejects the letter. Murphy says it doesn't matter what he wants and gives him the letter. We're left to inquire at the monastery and make our way there. On the way, Murphy finds a newspaper clipping of a story about a local boy who was abducted on his way home from school. Every once in a while, Downpour will play true to its name and it will begin to rain. A storm will come across the town, the skies turning purple with lightning and our ears filling with thunder. This does add a certain atmosphere to the game. Combined with Daniel Licht's new OST, it can create a spooky little town to be a part of. In the interest of repeating myself, though, I don't think it reaches the heights of Team Silent's works, but it works in its own way. Murphy arrives at the monastery, and the sister there says that there is no mistake. She's been waiting for him.
May I help you?
I'm Murphy Pendleton. I received this letter today, but I think there's been a mistake.
Ah, yes, Mr. Pendleton. We've been expecting you. You were the only family we were able to locate. Your presence is very welcome.
Family? No, that can't be.
Bless you, child. I understand this must be very confusing for you.
She tells him to meet her in the East Wing morgue, but he should look around in the meantime. The monastery is incredibly dilapidated, most rooms split by massive gorges in the center. Murphy finds a fire axe behind a red curtain and is chased by dolls. He finds a boy playing with a toy car. He says he's not supposed to talk to strangers, but the boy knows who Murphy is. Murphy says his son used to play with cars like that and that he's dead now.
Because she said you're the boogeyman.
Boogeyman? What are you talking about? Who said that?
She did. She told me all about you.
Why is she crying? Who is she?
I don't know. Just some girl. She's always sad.
The boy says there's a secret boogeyman rhyme that we have to learn, so that's our next objective. Murphy makes his way through the chapel and eventually finds an altar, locked behind an iron grate. We can use the chandelier to smash it open and find a part of the rhyme on the pedestal. In the bathroom of the main building, Murphy sees a terrifying sight in the mirror. We find a theater with a really interesting puzzle. There's a script for a play on one of the tables, and we have to follow the script by operating the stage mechanics. We have to turn on lights, drop curtains and sets, and even create sound effects in the right order. Doing this properly turns the world into the setting of the play, and we can walk downstairs into a real cabin. Inside, we find a chest with a picture lock that needs completed. Inside the chest is the second piece of the rhyme that we need. Murphy chases a girl through the school and eventually finds a blackboard with a chalk-drawn chain on it. Erasing it allows us to open it and reveal a child's drawing. Murphy flashes back to chasing his own child, Charlie, through the forest. We find another psychological evaluation of a patient in the other room, and a note about the same patient not improving after shock therapy. A strange storm begins on one of the upper floors, and Murphy finds 3 screamers on gurneys. To get the last piece of the rhyme, we have to slide the bodies under the X-ray machine and find out which one has the key inside their stomach. Murphy can then dig it out and get a key and the last rhyme piece. We return to the boy and the boogeyman approaches.
Kid, I got the rhyme. I say it and you open the door. That's how it works, right? Hey, did you hear me? I said... Hey! Kid! Look out, it's... Get out of there! Come on! Poor little Steven Skelter. Even the chaplain won't forgive you.
Murphy tries to say the rhyme before he hurts the boy, but it's no use. This scene was actually pretty brutal to watch. It was the first time I was kind of wowed by a scene in a Western-developed Silent Hill. Maybe my bar has just become that low, or maybe this was actually kind of good. Murphy flashes back to his son's death, arriving at the scene of the crime, looking for Charlie. The girl shows up and scolds Murphy because she thinks he's killed the boy. Murphy chases after her, and the other world arrives. We have to chase her through the place, again avoiding the void. Eventually, we get into a battle with the boogeyman. We don't really have to damage him, just avoid his attacks until he gets bored and knocks a hole in the wall for us to escape through. Traveling through this hole sees us arriving at a theater where we can bring down the curtains and chandelier. Igniting the blue candles on the chandelier and raising it back up will cast UV light on the walls, revealing 5 symbols. These symbols correspond with bells in the next room. We can ring these in order to make the room flood and open these large doors. I just really can't say enough how I love the huge set pieces that this game presents. They're fantastic and interesting. They lend a certain grandiosity to the events, and there's just always something nice to look at. Murphy arrives in an attic and sees the girl with a strange figure in a wheelchair. Before he can reach them, he falls through the ceiling and arrives in the morgue with the sister.
Where am I?
Why are you doing this to me?
Thank you for coming to shepherd your son home, Mr. Pendleton. I know it's difficult losing a child.
Murphy pulls the sheet off the body in front of him, but it's the boogeyman.
Held against the word of God.
I
they
get
cried
it!
out to the Lord in their trouble.
I screwed up,
He saved
but I didn't
them.
see any other
He
way.
brought them out of darkness.
You
to
don't
the
know what it
shadow of
was
death,
like to
and
know it
broke
was
their
my
bonds
fault he
apart.
was gone. Every
You who
time I
seek God,
shut
let
my
your heart
eyes,
revive.
I saw Charlie's
For the
face,
Lord
and all I
hates
could
thee and
think
does not
was,
despise
that
his who
monster
are
is still
prisoners.
alive, but I'll never get to see
Amen.
my boy again. Why are you doing this to me? What do you want?
The boogeyman gets up and tosses him across the room, and we're transported to a forest. We have to fight him for real this time, down by the lake. He pulls the mask off the body, and it turns out to be him, the face flashing back between Charlie and his.
You killed him. You killed the boogeyman.
Doesn't matter. It didn't bring you back. Nothing can bring you back.
The boogeyman's body fades, and the boat key is underneath. We head out of the monastery, through the sewers, and make our way to the boat. We have to bring a bridge down on the way, and when we arrive at the pier, it's time to head out. This is kind of the point of no return for this game, the time when it would be smart to finish up any side quests we haven't completed yet. I haven't really talked about any of the side quests besides 2, so I'd like to go through them quickly because they're all pretty interesting for the most part. They also comprise most of the playtime for the game. The story content is relatively short, and I spent most of my time in the game completing these non-story missions. The Art Collector side quest has us collecting multiple paintings throughout the game. We can take these paintings to an art gallery in town. Inside the art gallery, we find out through documents that the owner has been extorting people for their paintings. If we place all of the paintings together on a table and match up the symbols, we can reveal a map with the UV and get the location of a nice treasure. The crypt that's marked on the map has some goodies and a tomahawk item inside. The birdcage quest is another ongoing one throughout the course of the game. We have to set 5 different birds free, and each time we'll unlock a short clip of Murphy walking through a colorful field. The last clip sees him finding Charlie sitting by a tree. The Ribbons side quest begins when we find a missing poster for a girl named Ariadne Johnson. We find a note on the ground from her mother telling her to follow specific ribbons that she's left throughout the town. When we eventually arrive at the girl's house, we find a note from the mother saying that she's leaving her child to have her own life, not chained by the burden that is motherhood. The bank side quest begins when we find an open vault inside one of Silent Hill's finest financial establishments. Trying to open one of the safe deposit boxes will start spawning waves of enemies that we have to fight. Each wave we defeat will open a deposit box with certain supplies inside. The homeless quest starts with a homeless man in the entrance to the underground train station. He'll ask us to find different items for him all over town: food, a coat, and a fishing rod. With each item we give him, he'll unlock different tunnels that we can use to traverse the town quicker. The Cinema Verite quest was one of my favorites. It takes place in an old movie theater. We have to find 3 film reels in the theater and replace the projector by finding a bulb in another part of town. We can play each of these films, which will turn the screen into a portal. Murphy can then travel into the films and explore them. Each film contains certain numbers that we can combine to unlock a padlock nearby. Inside, we can use the film splitter to combine all 3 films and enter it into the projector. This will create a final film that is a combination of the 3 previous areas that we visited. Inside the trunk at the end is our reward, a golden gun. The gramophone side quest takes place in a small apartment. Murphy finds a gramophone and a murder scene nearby. Placing a vinyl record we find in the apartment on the gramophone and playing it will reveal a murder scene with the message, "Turn back time." When we reverse the record, we see the murder scene play out backwards. We have to put the victim's spirit to rest by burning the murderer's portrait. The Shadow Play quest is another ongoing one that starts at a loft in the north side of the city. We find a map that reveals specific locations all over the town. At each location, we find a totem in a box and have to use the totem to cast shadows on the wall, forming a symbol. The totem will then transform into a Soul Eye token. Collecting all 5 tokens and bringing them back to the loft will give us a demon statue, a weapon used to bash Screamer brains in. The Ashes to Ashes quest begins close to the pier. Murphy finds a house with a funeral announcement and an urn full of ashes on the mantel. Our job is to spread the ashes in the special place photographed in the picture. This reveals a sequence of numbers on the bench, and we can use it to open the safe on the 2nd floor to the house. The Dead Man's Hand side quest sees us finding a man who died with his hand in a vice and had his heart ripped out. We have to journey downstairs through the sewers to find a beating heart at the end. We can place this back inside of the body to get a first aid kit. The Mirror Mirror quest has a magic mirror in a house. We're tasked with spotting the differences in the mirror world and changing them in the real world to match. The note on the ground talks about a woman who believes that things are chasing her in the mirror world, probably a reference to Silent Hill Origins. These side quests are all super interesting and just generally fun to complete. I felt they were great additions to the game, and it was definitely a step in the right direction for the series to evolve. My only issue with them was that they were a lot of work, and the rewards never really seemed proportional to what you had to do to complete them. Sometimes there wasn't even a reward at all for completing them. A lot of the item rewards didn't feel that good because I knew that I had to hang on to it for it to be worth it. Plus, a lot of the quests were completed right before I got onto the boat, and I ended up having good weapons that I immediately lost because the game takes all of your weapons right after this point. Murphy gets onto the boat and Cunningham arrives. She wants to stop Murphy and eventually shoots him. He goes dark and flashes back to being in prison. Sewell says he has to pay back the favor that he gave Murphy before he leaves. He wants Murphy to kill someone for him during a riot that he's been planning. Murphy agrees out of fear of getting caught for the murder of Napier. Murphy wakes up and he's back in jail. The creature in the wheelchair is just outside his cell. It wheels away and Murphy makes his way through the prison. As he walks across the downed beam, he sees flashes of the prison riot that night. We solve a puzzle involving his prisoner number to gain access to a shotgun and try to build our arsenal back up to what it used to be. On our way through the prison, we find notes to a woman from a prisoner named Rick. He's trying to get out of prison and he seems to have a plan. We fight a new enemy in here, the Juggernaut. They're incredibly strong and will knock off a lot of our health. But other than that, they function like most of the humanoid enemies in the game. We see an image of Murphy writhing in his cell and find a note from Murphy's wife, saying she'll never forgive him for what he did. We find a be on the lookout order for someone in connection with the murder of an 8-year-old boy. Charlie opens a door from a security room and we get a genuinely terrifying sequence that made me jump out of my pants. Murphy finds an article about the prison touting it as a haunted and dismal place. We find a workshop where we have to use the UV light to find pieces of a door code around the room. Entering the locked room, we find a coin, and immediately something starts trying to bash its way into the office. We have to get into the vent before it gets us and escape. We fall through the ceiling and see the flashback to the beginning of the riots. We find a note from Coleridge denouncing Sewell for his actions as a guard. We finally arrive in the showers and find 4 pieces of evidence from the crime scene before the world transforms into the other world. Arriving on a lift, we're forced to fight waves of enemies before the lift will move on. This whole prison sequence honestly throws a lot of enemies at us, and it's pretty relentless with its encounters. You always kind of feel like you're not going to be able to make it through this one, but you do. We arrive in a strange mirrored room where we can turn valves and appear in the other version of the room. There's 2 juggernauts in the other room, and we have to use spotlights to guide them and trap them in cages. We can then open a door on the other side. We avoid some blade traps and arrive at a prison yard. Murphy uses some spotlights to frustratingly guide some enemies into the middle of the yard. When the enemies are locked up, we can safely move to the next area. We're chased by the void through the levels of cells and eventually arrive at a lift. This takes us in front of a door with 2 scales. We have to drop all 4 pieces of evidence into one of the scales, and the doors will open. Inside, we face our first of 2 final bosses, the Wheelman. This is the creature we've seen throughout the game, but much larger. We have to journey to the 4 corners of the room and shine a spotlight on him while avoiding his smashes and throws. When he's stunned by the light, we can pull one of the tubes out, injuring him. When all 4 tubes are pulled out, we're in the showers of the prison, standing over the dead man. Cunningham arrives and scalds us for killing a good man.
What?
He was a good man. A good man.
What the hell are you talking about? That thing tried to kill me. It's not a man, it's a monster. No, that's not how it was supposed to go. That's not what I agreed to.
Murphy realizes the man is Cunningham's father. We see Murphy's flashback as he met Coleridge in the showers, Sewell setting up the whole thing. Murphy tries to explain himself, but Cunningham doesn't care. Suddenly, Murphy turns into the boogeyman, and he defends himself. This is our final boss battle, Anne. We have to defeat her as the boogeyman, using our ranged attacks, smashing the ground and generating a tremor across the floor, or swing our hammer in close range. When she goes down, we have the option of sparing or killing her. Murphy spares her, and we see the rest of the flashback from earlier.
No. I won't do it.
Yeah, I thought you might say that.
No!
Jesus, you're pathetic. What about Napier? The guy kills your boy. You go through all the trouble of getting yourself locked up with him, and what happens? I serve him to you like a fucking Christmas goose, and you can't even finish the job.
Murphy refusing to kill Coleridge, but Sewell doing it himself in the end and framing Murphy in the process. Anne realizes what happened and forgives Murphy. As they hug, they're back on the shore of the lake. Anne lets Murphy free by telling the officers that he died. This is only one ending of Silent Hill Downpour, which has 6 overall. The ending system depends on a couple factors. You have a general karma score, which you get over the course of the game. Killing enemies after incapacitating lowers your karma, and leaving them raises your score. Trying to save Cunningham raises your score, and leaving her lowers it. Trying to save JP raises your score, and taunting him lowers it. Sparing Anne with a positive score will give us the forgiveness ending that we just saw. Sparing Anne with a negative score will show us the same scene in the flashback, and Anne frees Murphy the same, but afterwards she goes back to Sewell to get revenge for her father. This is the truth and justice ending. The full circle ending comes if we decide to kill Anne with a positive karma score. We see a flashback sequence of Murphy actually killing Frank in the showers. He attempts to commit suicide, but wakes up in his cell at the beginning of the prison sequence, doomed to repeat the events over again. The execution ending comes if you kill Anne with a negative karma score. Murphy is being executed in front of a crowd, framed for the death of his child and convicted for the death of Coleridge. The surprise ending can be completed by finishing the side quest Digging Up the Past, which can only be achieved on the second playthrough. This sees us digging up artifacts by barrels marked with candles throughout the game. Murphy is seen digging an escape hole out of prison and arrives in a room where a surprise party is being held for him, with everyone there. James, Mary, Heather, bobblehead nurses, and Walter Sullivan. At the end, Pyramid Head arrives to cut the cake before the game ends. The reversal ending only happens when you lose during the boss fight with Anne, and reverses the roles, having Anne in the cell block and Murphy as the guard. Most of the extras in Downpour come in the form of artifacts that can be found throughout the game. They're mostly references to previous games, a bottle of a Glauphidus, UFOs, and radios. Some bonus weapons can be achieved by unlocking a locker near the beginning of the game with some different codes. Each code was a part of a different in-game bonus from buying the game through different retailers. GameStop offered a nail gun and a double axe, Amazon offered a pistol and a baseball bat, and Best Buy offered a rifle and a golf club. So what really happened in Silent Hill Downpour? Well, Downpour itself makes that a pretty difficult question to answer. Through the course of the story, it seems like what happens is that Murphy Pendleton's son is killed by Patrick Napier. Riddled with grief and burning with the fires of revenge, he leads the police on a 10-hour car chase to get locked up in the same prison as Napier. He makes a deal with the guard Sewell and ends up in the same shower as Napier, killing him. In exchange for this, Sewell wants Murphy to kill Coleridge for him. This is where things get ambiguous, though. Silent Hill's different endings obscure this truth. In some endings, Murphy didn't kill Coleridge. In some endings, Murphy didn't even kill Napier. In some endings, he does kill Coleridge and Napier. And in one ending, he killed Coleridge and Charlie himself. So we can't really be sure what happened in those showers. Either way, Murphy ends up in Silent Hill when being transferred to a maximum security facility. Coleridge's daughter tracks Murphy down trying to get vengeance and lives or dies at his hand. This is kind of Downpour's biggest issue, its ending. The endings in Silent Hill have traditionally left what happens after the game up to the player's actions to decide, but that generally doesn't bleed into the actual events before the game as well. I think this is a mistake because it muddies the waters of the story. Part of the fun of delving into Silent Hill's story is knowing that there are definitive answers to the questions we're looking for. We just have to look hard enough. Here, there really aren't definitive answers, so it doesn't incentivize research and analysis. The setup for the story was pretty interesting, though, and I think it works for the most part up until the ending. The game overall is something I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would. Like I said before, either my bar is so low at this point, or the game is actually kind of okay. Journeying through the town and taking part in the side quests was something I found genuinely enjoyable. It was interesting, and experiencing the little stories in the different houses felt like I was actually learning things about the people in the town. The environments were another strong point for me. Large open areas that felt interesting to look at and developed a world that felt lived in. I think this game is overall a little underrated, and I think I know why. This was the last mainline entry in the series, and I think it's a little easy to hate. There's definitely problems with it, but I don't think it's the worst out of the Western-developed Silent Hill games. I think when you're comparing a game to Silent Hill 2, though, it's incredibly hard to live up to that standard, and I don't even really think that it's possible at this point. But that isn't just the fans' expectations, it's also the fault of all of the developers trying to recreate Silent Hill 2. This story, just like the ones previous, try to recreate the story from that fantastic entry, and it just doesn't work as well. It's never going to. Silent Hill developers needed to stop reliving the past and try something brand new, a different story with a different twist, a new reveal, and not just an outline that they've been following for years. It would almost feel better if Silent Hill had fallen into years of terrible, awful, unplayable messes of video games, but the truth is, it didn't. It was doomed to a fate much worse. Mediocrity. Silent Hill Downpour was met with mixed reviews from critics. Most notated its flawed combat system, but praised its imaginative gameplay. Silent Hill would have a tumultuous and interesting next few years, but we'll wrap up Silent Hill's story in the full retrospective. Bye, Dad.